Extra glasses. My name is Laurie Byro, 31 Lebanon Road, Hewitt, New Jersey, and Board of Ed and Dr. Animo. I've lived in West Milford since 1959, paid taxes to the town since 1979. My husband and I bought a vacant piece of land through a tax sale, built our house from a log kit. We did most of the work ourselves. I graduated from West Milford High in 1976, attended community college in West Milford. I'm the current poet in residence at the West Milford Township Library. I worked in library land for 15 years. And by the way, nepotism comes from Italian and I'm his nephew, just in case you wanted to know what that was. My father owned a business here, was on the MUA, the Wanakee Regional Sewerage, did the wells plumbing for the jungle habitat. I went to Hillcrest School. My brother had to go to Butler High because there's no high school in the town. I think I understand much of the community of West Milford. I would like expenses to be cut in this town, but not off the backs of the bus drivers and aides. I've always wanted raises for teachers, etc. To me, the bus drivers should be a main part of the Board of Education of West Milford. My husband has been a bus driver in West Milford for 5 years. During that time, I've witnessed the operations of the transportation department, gotten to know some of the other drivers. I've seen the interaction between these dedicated employees and the students. I attended school here my entire life. When there were a few altercations in the past with a former supervisor and some employees here, since I have a paralegal degree, I spoke to some dozens of parents of the students Mike and other drivers were driving. Without exception, parents were delighted with the passionate professionalism of these drivers. Having said that, some of them are afraid to go to the Board of Ed and express their concerns. They clearly felt that the drivers who met their child in the morning and returned their child in the evening were barometers of what was happening with their child. If you want to know about students' physical and mental health in the school system, you need to also speak to the drivers. Each one of us knows the value of teachers. Support staff is as critical. Some of these staff members, like the aides, are not being paid a fair or a living wage for what they do. Their worth and the driver's worth is immeasurable, and I think you should honor them and not consider outsourcing them. In the 5 years Mike has worked for you, I want to give 3 examples of why you should not outsource. Ultimately, the taxpayers will suffer. Immediately, the children will suffer. There are dozens of examples of the disasters of outsourcing currently in the papers. Drivers with no licenses, leaving kids in unsafe situations, drivers with no background checks, drivers unable to communicate, and the evidence is all there. Mike has opted to drive special needs children. He did this because the first year he was driving as a substitute, somehow the former supervisor and the teachers didn't have a little girl listed on the bus. It became clear as he dropped off the children she was not accounted for and she was special needs. She did not speak. He asked her name, silence. The supervisor was about to ask him to return to the station when between the teachers and him, they thought her name was and they thought her address was. He asked if this area looked like her house. Silence. This child started rocking and crying and was clearly upset. Mike said to her, "Let's have fun, we're lost. We'll sing and we'll get you home. This is a fun game." She stopped crying and acted happy. Result, there was a crowd waiting for this child cheering. It was dark and she ran off the bus into her grandparents' arms saying, "I was lost and Mr. Mike got me home." She said this as clear as a bell. Second example, our buddy, I won't name him. I knew him from the time he was 3 years old because of Mike and his bus. He is now 7, and his parents and he ran into us a few years ago, and Joey insisted Mr. Mike sit with him at a town autism event. He's autistic. He invited us to hockey. We spent Sunday at the zoo with him on autism walks. He has become our favorite little boy in the world. The only connection to Mike was that Mike was his school bus driver. Third example. Mike had a very difficult run, lots of incidents and negative behavior. Mike got into a discussion with the mom about cooking. She knew from write-ups that her son was one of the most difficult students on the bus. Mike, with permission, made the family dinner. After that, there was no problems. I guarantee each of the 50-something bus drivers here have stories like these. The bus drivers do so much more than drive these children to school. Outsourcing their positions would have negative financial and social behavioral consequences. Addiction and bullying issues are the worst example of a community that has become broken. Mike's kids really are special and not special needs kids. I ask you to look at the facts and history of towns where outsourcing was a disaster and reevaluate this proposal. Selfishly, I want a safe and healthy community for us all. Thank you.